Maggie had been the unit secretary at St. Clair's Hospital for nearly 5 years. As someone who worked the graveyard shift, she thought she'd seen everything: code blues, frantic families, and nurses running down hallways in a blur of chaos. But the reports she filed for the psychiatric ward were often the strangest, and in time they began to blur the line between real and supernatural. One night a few months ago, things began to feel different. The reports coming from the ward started showing strange patterns. It began when nurses would ask her to log strange, seemingly nonsensical requests from patients. For instance, an older man in room 314, sedated due to a psychotic episode, repeatedly begged to be moved to another room, claiming his roommate, a man who had died years ago, was watching him. Maggie shrugged it off at first, attributing it to the nature of the psychiatric unit. But the reports kept coming. One patient complained about the sound of breathing under her bed, even though the room had been empty for weeks. Another refused to sleep, insisting that shadowy figures danced in the corners of his vision when the lights were out. Then it became personal. One night, as Maggie sat at her desk, finishing her reports, she felt a cold draft sweep past her, chilling the back of her neck. She glanced up to see if someone had come into the office, but the door was closed. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, and she realized something was off. The temperature in the room had dropped, but no one had turned down the heat. The next shift change report came in. 2 more patients had complained of the man standing at the foot of their beds, staring at them. Maggie shuddered but shook it off, laughing to herself about how tired she must have been. Around 2 a.m., she began entering a discharge form for a patient who had been in the hospital for a few weeks. The name gave her pause. This patient, a young woman, had been involved in a car accident just 2 days ago. Maggie distinctly remembered that the woman had passed away from her injuries. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the files. The woman's death had been officially recorded, yet there was her name, freshly written by one of the nurses, asking for her to be discharged. She rushed to the psychiatric unit, heart pounding in her chest, to ask about the form. But the nurse on duty looked puzzled. She hadn't written it, and the patient wasn't in the system anymore. From that night on, the reports got worse. Patients in the psych ward, ones who had never met, began talking about seeing the same thing. A man in a hospital gown, wandering the halls with bloodied feet. His face was distorted, like it was melting away, and he didn't speak. He only watched. Nurses started to believe that this figure was something more than a hallucination. The final straw came a month later, on a quiet night when Maggie worked alone. She was filing paperwork late into the night when the phone rang. She answered, expecting a routine call from one of the units. Instead, a heavy, laboured breathing filled the line. "Hello?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. The breathing continued, followed by a soft whisper. "I need to be discharged," the voice said, barely audible. Maggie froze, her skin prickling. She slammed the phone down, her pulse racing. The hospital system confirmed that no one had placed the call, at least not from any line that was in use. In the days that followed, Maggie requested to transfer to the day shift. She left behind the strange occurrences of the night and the ghostly figures from the psych ward. But sometimes when she passed the hallway leading to the ward, she would catch a glimpse of something in the corner of her eye. A shadow, watching, waiting. And every once in a while the reports still come in, about the man who walks the halls late at night, seeking discharge from a place no one ever leaves.